Hello and welcome back to Trail and All Training. My name is Will Franz. I'm a running coach and a strength coach, and the whole goal of this podcast is to help you train a little better so you can have more fun out on the trails. Today we're going to talk about a few things, including some self-sabotaging stories and some rehab ideas. And if you appreciate any of this, I would really love if you followed or subscribed or whatever button is relevant on the platform where you're viewing this. Or you could just share it with somebody or any of the things that help tell the algorithm robots that you want to see this again, because that helps push it to other people. So today, I really want to get into some self-sabotaging stories ideas. I put out an email, and I think a lot of us just tell unhelpful stories when it comes to training or life or whatever. First, I had a couple chats in the past few days, week, two, maybe, and they're all about injuries. One of them was with myself, which is the example I'm going to use, but I think I had 5 of them in the past couple weeks with one client, one of them being me, and then just some few random people on the internet that messaged me. And a lot of the time with injuries, we kind of let them get out of control because they're not a big enough problem yet. And until it's actually a problem in a way that maybe negatively affects our life, then we're not going to do anything about them. And this is where we end up turning a niggle or a tweak or whatever you want to call it into a proper injury that requires a lot of time off and maybe a visit to a doctor and a PT. It's because we don't need to stop doing the shit that we like to do, so we overlook it and really just don't give it the respect that it deserves, and as a result we end up just making it worse and worse and worse until we're actually sidelined, right? And I've been doing this for my Achilles. I've been doing some kind of rehab things that I've been able to convince my brain was enough until this morning, actually. And what I really need to be doing is just future pacing a bigger problem. I need to think into the future about what is going to happen if I don't keep doing this, because I don't really like stretching. I don't like the boring rehab stuff that actually works. And that said, I don't think rehab necessarily needs to be boring or restorative movement or whatever we call it, but I do know it's kind of what I need to do now. I also need to do a version of a calf raise, which I just find tedious and kind of unpleasant. So I've been avoiding it. Now it's a little worse than it was a couple weeks ago, and if I don't do something, it's going to spiral. And I feel it's very important is the second part there. If I don't do something, it's going to blah, 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 right? Because I also have the choice to just keep going the way I'm going and then get injured and be forced to take a time off. That is an option. I'm an adult. I can make that choice. We shouldn't let someone on the internet tell you that you have to do something, because you always have options. You can sell all your possessions, abandon your life, move to Thailand, and live in a van selling shrimp while you're scuba diving every day. That is an option that you can pursue if you so choose, but you might not want the other aspects of your life. You might like your family. I like my dog. I like being here and my friends here, right? So even though I've kind of done that in the past when I moved to Korea, if I think about doing it again, it's not really the life consequences I necessarily want, right? And we can see the same kind of thing when we look at injuries. You have options. And for me, right now, I have options, but there's a finite amount of them. There's not really a magic one that's going to get me all the things I want, where I just keep doing what I'm doing and it gets better. That's not real. I can either stop running, I can do rehab and help my Achilles get better before it spirals. I can do none of that shit and keep doing what I'm doing and then end up dealing with a real problem in 2 months that might lead to some very serious tendinopathy or a tear. I can pull back and just stick to a really low mileage every week, because I happen to know that's tolerable. There aren't many more. That's about it. So the best one of that list for me and what I want to achieve in the future is actually do the fucking rehab, right? But I haven't been able to convince myself that that's the path. So I guess I'm going to start doing that because otherwise I'm going to get very seriously hurt. Now, today, I'd said I wanted to talk about some self-sabotaging stories, and you might have gotten an email from me on this. I'll say that I'm like turning more emails into podcasts and Facebook posts into emails and all sorts of things because there's multiple reasons for this, which I will reveal here. I'm not necessarily the most creative human on the planet. I'm probably a better technician than I am a creative. I like to know how things work. Once I know how they work, I try to work to fix them. And I also just don't think we need like that much shit. We have so much content out there that I probably don't need to be creating 10 hours of it a week. It's just not necessary. So if we can repurpose a little bit, that feels smart. It's partially why I keep this podcast on the shorter side. I used to do longer ones that involved a lot more prep, and then I kind of realized that I'm listening to a lot of podcasts and they're taking up a lot of my time, so maybe you are too. So maybe I should just provide a shorter option for those who maybe want something a little more punchy. And then finally, two more. I can get to details a little more. So for like an email, I try to keep it somewhat short and concise. The written word kind of matters to me, whereas rambling into a podcast microphone is not something that I'm never going to develop the skills of an orator. I'm just not. So I can just ramble. And then the last one is I want to give people multiple options. So I'm not really a big email guy. I don't read a lot of them. I'm on quite a few lists of people I really like with good information. I just don't really sit at my computer or sit on my phone and read emails. I listen to a lot of podcasts though. So I figured some people are email people, some people are podcast people. If we put this out on multiple places, then maybe more of us can get the information. And for those of us who like both, then maybe we can get a deeper dive on some of these things, right? So all of this to say that we often tell ourselves these self-sabotaging stories, and sometimes they're true. That's a very real point here. It's not that they're lies, but identifying with them as part of our core being basically guarantees that you're not going to do anything real to change it. So for me, growing up, I was always the slow one. And this started very young. I'm not quite sure when, but it was definitely sometime in elementary school. And in retrospect, there's pretty good reasons for that, right? I've been open about the fact that I had breathing issues and I've had nasal reconstructive surgery when I was 19. And we didn't really know any of those things because nobody knows what's normal until you get very well displayed that it's not normal. This is why it can be hard to find color blindness in a kid for a while. But at the time, I was just slow, right? So we did these presidential physical fitness tests, and most of the people based on the demographics of humans that I know listen to this podcast probably remember this. And if you're younger than that, one, welcome to my podcast, child, and two, I'm happy for you because they were terrible. Now, so every year we'd get together for a week in gym class and do a battery of physical tests to see if we were in sufficient physical shape for whatever. I used to think it was the military, but I believe I remember looking this up, and it actually had nothing to do with that, but I can't remember what the actual reason was. But this thing was silly. We'd all get together and do these really random assessments. And when we did these assessments, we would never do them again for a full year. If we actually cared about this test and wanted to improve, then probably should have spent a little more time working on them, right? This is actually a big thing with the NFL Combine, where Sorry, my microphone just died, so I just turned off Instagram Live. So this is actually a big thing with the NFL Combine, where they noticed that once people actually started practicing the metrics on the test, then they just started doing a lot better on the Combine. Because no shit, you should actually practice the test, right? So when we start practicing the test, we do a lot better on things that we're looking for. However, we never did that. We never did any of that. We would like do this mile run every year. We do stretchy and reachy things. We'd do some pull-ups, and we wouldn't touch any of that for like an entire other year. It's not like once a month maybe you go in and practice some pull-ups, which wouldn't be enough, but it would at least like fake like it mattered. Instead, we played with like parachutes and scooters and played dodgeball, and I personally really appreciate that because I think athletics should be fun for kids. I train a couple kids, and I think one of the biggest mistakes we can do is probably take sports a little too seriously too early for children who don't really care, and then you create a really bad relationship with fitness for the long term. So I'm actually not criticizing gym class. I'm saying that if gym class had nothing to do with building this level of physical fitness that we were supposedly being tested on, so maybe the test was stupid. And while I was decent at a lot of these things, there were two that I always failed. And my friends who were like really good at the ones where I failed always like sucked at some of the ones I was good at. So like they couldn't do the sit and reach one because their hamstrings and whatever were super tight. And they were really bad at the shuttle run because they couldn't change direction. However, they were pretty good at pull-ups where I sucked. And I also think these standards were wild. I forget what they were. I looked them up when I was writing the email, but I do remember thinking that I don't think I could pass the pull-up standard for a 17-year-old now. I think it was like 13 or 14. And I have big legs. I've had big legs since I was a kid. I haven't had anything resembling a thigh gap since I was like 4 years old. So there's just no way that unless I practice them very often, I'm going to be very good at pull-ups. They're a tough skill and they're a really difficult movement. And I'm an active adult who climbs a lot of rocks and walls. So if we're looking at that, it just felt kind of completely irrelevant to skill base, right? And then when we also look at the other one where I sucked was the mile, though. And this is why this is relevant to this podcast, because running. Every year, like line up on this soccer field. We had a bunch of fields at the back of the school, partially because I was a like private school kid, and partially because we had the pleasure of sharing a campus with a like local college. So we would like share the soccer field, so we had a lot of space in Pennsylvania. And line up, and we'd go run around them, and we'd run like children. So you'd go out way too fast, and then you'd kind of burn out, and then you'd get your second wind, and then you'd burn out, and then you'd get your third wind, and then eventually it was over. And I think I hit the mark once, because there was one year where it was like just under an 8-minute mile, and I had just gotten a mild growth spurt for like 5th grade or something like that. And then after that, it was all downhill again. But I never made it to the highest one. And it was just difficult. There was some kid who I definitely know ran a like sub 6 mile before we were 10. I'm sure he became a track star. But most of the kids like did fine. They kind of passed. And then there was like me and one other dude at the back of our very small class who couldn't make it. And then this continued. This was not just a fitness test thing. Like the second year I wrestled, I made varsity. To be clear, I wasn't very good. There just wasn't a lot of competition in the weight class, and I was a little better than the other guy. And it means I had to show up at some ungodly time in the morning, like 6 or 6:30, to do extra conditioning. And I still couldn't hit the times, because when you can't breathe, it's really hard to build cardio. And when you're bad at something, as a like child and teenager, you tend to avoid it rather than put in any extra work towards it because it's deeply unpleasant, especially when you're not actually taught to do it well, right? So we'd run this pattern around the gym. We called it L's. And the gym was in like an L shape, and it was 2 stories. So you'd like run down one hallway, down the stairs, run the L on the bottom, back up the stairs, and run back to the start point. And of course, I couldn't hit the times, right? Like we'd run this pattern, and it just, I don't know what it was. It's probably like a 15, 20-second standard or something. And if you didn't hit it, the whole team runs again, because that's how team sports work. And I remember definitely getting looked at in a way that it wasn't mean. Like I wasn't bullied at this phase of my life. That was more middle school. But it was definitely like, come on, man, like as if I wasn't trying, right? Like, and I think that's why it actually wasn't mean. They could all see I was trying. It was just like an exasperation, like, cause it sucked. Running L's was awful. And there was just, again, not a lot of actual coaching towards conditioning. We wrestled a lot and then did like Navy SEAL training for conditioning without any actual prep. It was just kind of brutal and not actually well executed. But he tried. The coach was nice. He just wanted us to be fast, and he was our history teacher, and he didn't know what he was doing. So it was fine. But this definitely like solidified the I can't run thing. I got year after year this like constant message that I was slow. And because partially I was. Couldn't breathe, couldn't do much cardio, and it was just this like self-perpetuating cycle. And it's been this story that I've told myself for probably as long as I can remember. And this was also a little bit from my dad, because he and I have a very similar build, like to the degree that when his college or friends see me, there's like this weird look of recognition on their face, because I look very much like he did at every stage of my life so far. And he always said something like, if I can't catch you in 20 meters, I don't want you bad enough. And like that's what kind of the basic thought I had as well. Like I'm a decent sprinter, but not really good at cardio. Now, the part that he didn't really share about that was he was also a like national level wrestler. So clearly he did cardio at one point and was very good at it. But it sucked because we're not necessarily built for it from a genetic standpoint. So I just had this story that I was slow, because I was, which made me stay slow, because I never really trained and never really knew how to train and never really looked into getting better at it. And then over the last 6 months, I've actually been trying to get faster, because I want to get better at this thing that I say matters to me. So I put my ego aside and decided to like embrace it was kind of boring and really frustrating work required to stop being slow. It requires you to actually take a relevant perspective on your paces and like know what your like have some idea. It's going to change day to day, right? Like there's no perfection in training, especially when you're not great at a sport. Like I'm not at a point where a 5-second difference in a pace matters to me, but 30 to 45 seconds definitely does, and we got to be honest about what that would be. So I have to have a basic idea of my mile time, and then we put in work, put in repeats, put in VO2 stuff, build the top end, do lactate stuff, actually fuel the training, right? And surprise, gotten faster. Like I'm still not fast, and I probably will never actually be fast in the grand scheme of things. There's no part of like, there's no me from the past life that I've lived that is going to end up running a like 15-minute 5K. It's just not real. I started running after 30. There's no base there that's going to lead to that, and nor underlying genetics that would lead to that. It's possible I could be a late in life 100-meter sprinter, but that's not what calls to me. But I am a lot faster. I am very likely faster than I've ever been. And the only other time would maybe be right before I left Korea. But I was training differently then and worse and like really hard, and probably looked like I was in better shape. But I'm stronger and faster than I've probably ever been at 35. And it's partially because I've like taken a step back and actually decided to see what I can do and put in some of the boring work. And it hasn't necessarily been easy, but it's been fun, because I've just committed to the progress, like the week after week, trying to push a little bit faster, or extend the distance a little bit more. Run almost every day for months now. I've done speed work every week. I've eaten more food. I've actually fueled my runs. I've prioritized some level of sleep when my body will let that happen. And I've also had to put some other goals on the back burner because I always have just so many of them. But it's working and I'm getting faster. And it's largely because I finally stopped holding on to this childhood identity of being the slow one. I just stopped accepting it and instead decided to see if I could prove it wrong. And as of now, I am making some semblance of progress. And sharing this, not because I like talking to myself, I actually find it very boring. I've lived this life. I don't need to hear this, but it's easy to overlook how much our personal stories can become our identity and how much impact these stories that we just maybe not even know that we're telling ourselves on the daily basis can affect our behaviors and affect what we do. I meet so many people who constantly talk themselves out of progress because they just don't believe it's even possible. They identify with whatever's been going on, be it I have bad sleep, or I'm weak, or I'll never be able to pick that up, or I can't deadlift that, or I can't squat, or I have knee pain, I have bad knees, my ankles hurt, all these things. And it's not that any of them are untrue, but constantly telling those stories means that we're probably not going to do any of the work to see if they're reparable or improvable. If you just have bad knees, well, depending what the problem is, the answer is often get stronger quads. But get stronger quads often involves you doing stuff that's probably not going to feel comfortable on your knees. Doesn't need to hurt, but it's probably not going to feel great. And if you just have bad knees, then as soon as it doesn't feel great, you're going to back off because you feel like you might be doing more damage. When instead we're actually just building some of the stimulus that's going to make your knees better in the long run. And this is the kind of stuff I see from everybody, not just runners or who think they're slow or whatever. It's every person in my job. We all have these stories that just don't help us. And it's possible you may never hit the goal, but you'll definitely won't know unless you try. And there's this old Henry Ford quote, whether you think you can or you can't, you're right. And the first half I think is insane because there was no possible world where I was going to be an NBA player. I'm a 5'7" person who can't jump super high and doesn't have great ball handling skills, even if I really practiced. But the second half is almost certainly true. If you don't think you can do something, you definitely can't because you're not going to put in the work to get there. And we just need to stop telling ourselves really unhelpful stories. Set some big goals, set some process goals, see what the target may be. Hey, could I maybe run a sub 20-minute 5K? Is that possible? If so, then it probably means I should first try to run a sub 25-minute 5K and see what ends up there. And once I achieve that, if that went really well, then maybe we adjust some paces and put in similar work and see what we can do. But you will never know unless you set a few goals along the way and put in the effort. You got to put the bullshit on hold and actually try and see what we can achieve. And I've been talking for way too long on this. It's been about 25 minutes, but I think this is important. And if you really want to do something, let's set the priorities, make sure we pull away the time in our day and actually try to make it happen. If you don't, that's fine. Again, I'm not here to tell you what your goals are or set them for you. But if you have goals and you really want to achieve them and you keep talking yourself out of them because you just think you're not built for it or whatever, then stop it. Give it a shot and see what happens. I hope this was helpful. I hope you have a great day. If by some happenstance you listen to this and are also at I Am Tough this weekend, give me a shout on Instagram or something. I'd love to meet you. I'll be posting it in my stories. I'm going to be out there crewing one of my runners. And whatever you're doing this weekend, I hope you have a lot of fun. I will talk to you later. Have some fun on the trails. Thank you again for listening to the Trail and Ultra Running Training Podcast. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. Just a reminder, nothing you hear on this podcast is medical advice, and you should always speak with a medical professional before making changes to your training or your nutrition. If you enjoyed the podcast or found it helpful, please leave a rating or review. It tells the algorithm robots that people like it, and that means more people will hear it. Or even better, just share it with someone who you think would benefit. If you prefer a video version, head to the Trail and Ultra Running Training Group on Facebook, or check out the Mountain Goat Endurance Coaching YouTube channel. Thank you again, and I hope you have a great next run.